As we begin the program, you're here at St. Philip the Deacon. We're spending some time thinking about the Trinity, and I am therefore reflecting on it here today with some old friends, Augustine and Aquinas. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. Pastor Tim Westermeyer here, Senior Pastor of St. Philip the Deacon in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. Good to be with you as always. Today, I am thinking about the Trinity. That's because in our 3-week sermon series at the start of the program year, I'm focusing on that. If you're interested in the first of those installments from the day before we're taping this is sermon, which would have been on September 10th. You can check that out at the link above. And so I just have a few reflections about the Trinity this morning because I'm sort of continuing to sit with it. And I have, among other books off to my side here, I have a book called, in fact, The Trinity, or On the Trinity, by St. Augustine or Augustine, depending on what your preference is. Augustine is one of the absolute towering figures of the church. His shadow looms large over the entire Christian tradition. He lived from about 354 to 430. He spent about 30 years on this book and never really finished it, which is sort of an indication of part of what I want to say, which is that the Trinity itself, and I want to give us sort of all freedom to be okay with this, is something that is so incalculable and difficult for us to understand. Forget difficult, impossible for us to understand, that I want to sort of say to us as Christians, that's okay. And in fact, one of the stories that is told about Augustine is a story that's recounted graphically on the cover of this book. It's told that while he was working on this book, this volume, he saw a young boy playing on the sea of the ocean. And he went up to the young boy, and the boy was digging a hole. And Augustine said, "Oh, my son, what are you doing?" And the boy said, "Well, I'm going to put the entire ocean into this hole." And Augustine condescendingly said to him, "Well, little boy, you can't do that. Don't be ridiculous." And the boy, who turns out was maybe an angel in disguise, said, "Nor can you fit the Trinity into your brain." Right? And so that's sort of a maybe umbrella theme for this discussion of the Trinity, and I'll lift up a couple of statements that reinforce that point from another book I'm reading right now. This is a book I actually did a class on called Light from Light, a theological reflection on the Nicene Creed. I talked in my sermon this past weekend about both the Apostles and the Nicene Creed. And again, two towering figures of the church, one of them Augustine again, say very similar things. So I'm going to quote from Augustine first, and then Aquinas. Aquinas lived later than Augustine, 1225 to 1274. So Augustine says this, where am I here? If you understand, that is not God. In other words, if you can put God in a box and comprehend God, you're talking about something smaller, less than, not as expansive and infinite as God. And in a very similar way, Thomas Aquinas, again, incredible intellect in the Christian tradition, says, whatever can be known or understood is less than God. Okay, whatever can be known or understood is less than God. I think that mystery of the Trinity, again, we've talked about this before, mystery, capital M, is it's a good thing, it's a freeing thing. It helps us to recognize that the God we bow down to is, in fact, infinitely more than we can ever understand, and that's okay, that we don't need to try to put God in a box. And in fact, when we do that, again, we're simply limiting God. All that said, God also did give us brains and invites us to reflect on and think about who God is and what that means for us in our lives in relation to God and one another. And so the final thing I will say, and again, we're going to talk about the Trinity now for the next couple of weeks in worship. I hope you'll join us for that. But the final thing I'll say, which has been really helpful for me as I reflect on at least one important fact about the Trinity, and that is the God as Christians we worship, is that it reminds us that within God's very self, whatever that even means. But we talk about God as the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, or the Creator, the Redeemer, the Sustainer. Within God's very self, God is in fact love. That God, the Father, loves God the Son, and the love they share in some ways you could talk about as the Holy Spirit. And that's a reminder to us that we are also invited in our lives to both receive that love which flows out from that Trinitarian God, and then once we receive it, to share it with a world in need. So, again, some modest reflections on the Trinity for today's episode. Again, if you'd like to listen to my preliminary reflections, please do so. And again, I hope we'll see you at church either in person or on live in the upcoming weeks. Until then, be well, stay in touch, and God bless.